Welcome to another edition of the Inside Scoop. My name is Neil Crawford. I am the founder of Anytime Soccer Training and also the host of the Inside Scoop. If you're not familiar with the show, it's a show that's dedicated to helping parents learn about the soccer pathways that would be available to their child if they live in another city around the world. And I have a doozy for you guys today. I always call these a trifecta, which is someone who knows soccer, someone who has experienced soccer in the U.S., and someone who has experienced or is from another country and understands soccer there. That's what we really look for. And then as a parent, I guess you say 4 points. That's what we really look for in a guest. And that's the perfect guest because they can share so many perspectives. And I have a special guest here from Italy. I'm going to let you introduce yourself. I'm going to let you pronounce your name in the proper accent, the way it's supposed to be. I don't want to butcher it. And we found each other through the Facebook group, and you gave us a long post, which we really broke down what was happening in Italy and how you compare it to the States. And we want to get your opinion. I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. So introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. So thank you for the introduction. My name is Simone Ghirlanda, and I'm currently actually in Italy, but I've been a long-time resident and most recently U.S. citizen as well. So I know very well the system, both in the U.S. and in Italy, and I'm happy to talk about some of the differences that I noticed. I guess my background is that I grew up playing in Italy. All the way from really like the U6, the earliest, youngest ages, to U19. So went through all the academy levels in Italy. At that time, or late 1990, I moved to the US to attend university in Texas. It wasn't on a scholarship. At the time, recruiting, I guess, opportunities in Europe were very limited due to like the inability to really scout for coaches, right, based in the US. I didn't really know the system either, so I actually attended a university where there was an immense soccer Division One team. It's the University of Texas at Austin, obviously a huge school. I did play for their club team for 4 years, which is a very nationally ranked club team. So went to like national tournaments every year. Actually, in North Carolina, I believe in Cary, very often the tournament was hosted, the finals. But yeah, so played in college as a club soccer, and then played for a number of years up to like 4 years ago when I was about to turn 40 in the typical like Sunday league teams that you have around the country. Played in Texas and California. Used to go to amateurs cap as well with the team I play with in California. So I kind of like, while I didn't get to play in college, I guess I play with guys that I played in college because my level was good enough to play with them in post college, and so I kind of saw it as well and heard from them about their experience. Soccer is like. Yeah, sure.
Hey guys, the very end froze. So you were saying you played at college, but I didn't understand about the level. You were saying something about the level.
So it wasn't Division One, and that's because I attended, when I moved from Italy, I moved to attend the University of Texas at Austin, which does not field the Division One men's soccer, just like back then the Big 12 conference did not. Still today doesn't. So I played what's called club college soccer. So I played for the university club team for like 4 years, went to national tournaments every year pretty much, and then kept playing after college in the, really like your amateur level available around the country. I lived in California, I lived in Florida, in Texas. So I played in like kind of like really the big regions of the country, you could say, for soccer, and played all the way until age 40. So that's really my experience with like with playing. Played until very recently, and now I'm a soccer parent, so I'm very much on top of like what's happening in the US, and now I'm spending time in Italy this year, so I can compare and make observations of what I've noticed is differences between the two systems.
Yeah, and that's exactly where we want to live. And because we got so much to cover, man, I'm going to jump right in and I really appreciate it. And then for our listeners, you're also available on the Facebook group. We're going to post this and they can ask more specific questions. All right. So what we're not going to do and what we typically do is go over how soccer works in the States. And I tend to go over that so our guests who are not familiar with soccer understand how to frame it. But we can skip that. You know how club soccer works. You obviously know how high school soccer works and sort of the differences there and how some kids can decide to play high school and others who play academy don't. And you know we have recreational and these challenge leagues and blah blah blah. And you know there's like a zillion other opportunities in between, and there's no unified soccer pyramid as well. You don't know exactly what you're getting, and you got to learn all this. So you know that. So that's the 2-second version of soccer in the States. So now, with that being said, can you describe the overall soccer culture, not culture, the overall youth soccer system in Italy? So I have a 10-year-old. We moved to Italy. What are the possible ways they can engage with the game?
Yeah, so in Italy, the system it's quite different from like what we have in the US. Definitely in Italy, it's probably very similar to most countries in Europe, just because the UEFA zone has very similar guidelines around what youth soccer should look like. So granted that like in order to play here as a child, you need to be a citizen of the country or at least become a resident for reasons that are not tied to like soccer. So for instance, it could be your father moving for a job in Europe, and then therefore you as a non-citizen could play in the Italian system or the French system or whatnot. The guidelines are the same everywhere. Assuming that like your child does move from the US system to the Italian one, which is what my son did this year, because we're spending half of the school year here. Well, the system here it's different because it's very unified. So we do not have, first of all, at youth level, a number of different leagues as it exists in the US, right? So we only have one system of leagues that are under the federation, which means that for once, one of the big differences is that travel time is severely reduced because the density of the towns in Europe and the number of teams within each town allows the federation to set up the younger ages to play really with teams that are like almost next door or within the most close reach. 20 minutes drive would be a fairly long drive here. So that's one big difference. You play everyone. You do not avoid playing certain teams because there may be some sort of politics involved in between the head of the clubs. And that makes the system very fluid because essentially it means that the field is really leveled for everyone to be able to be noticed, succeed, and really take the most advantage of like the opportunity being given. So that I think is like one of the major differences that anybody would tell you about. The second one is that here, every youth club is attached to a first team. I mean, like an adults team, and depending on where the adults team is in the league system of the country, that may determine usually how well funded the academy, so that everybody below the first team is set up. So typically, if the club is in the first three divisions of the professional rankings, which is like your Serie A, Serie B, and Serie C, then by the fact that the first team is on those three in one of those three divisions, then the profession it's called the professional academy, which means it has a special status, which just gives them obviously a lot of leverage when they recruit, and typically it also allows them to either be free for the bigger clubs or be very cheap for the kind of like smaller professional clubs, just because the amount of sponsor that those clubs tend to have is it's much bigger and larger than like amateur clubs, right? So if your club drops from like the Serie C, which is like the third division, into the fourth, at that point it has lost professional status. It means that most likely, you're not going to be able to fully free fund the youth academy, and so parents will have to basically support part of the cost, at least for the younger age groups. And as you go down the pyramid, then of course there's just less money involved, so the kids have to pay more to play, right? Nothing like the US, but still, like, it is not free, as a lot of times you hear in the US. That only the US has pay to play. What we do here as well is just smaller dollar value.
All right, so let's try to unpack some of this. I get there, my child is 10, and they're an absolute beginner. Are there clubs or teams, or there tryouts where they will not be able to make it, and the club will say, sorry, but you're not good enough for all practical purpose to be in our teams? Or do they accept everyone and find a level that works for you?
At 10 years old, there is a selection and a filter, but that doesn't mean that like a kid that has never played at 10 years old or is a beginner is not going to find a place to play. What typically happens is that, again, on the scale of where the first team is, I mean, we have 9 divisions from Serie A, again, the first 3 being professionals, down to the bottom. So typically the very bottom clubs, where the first team is in this 9th or 8th divisions, they typically have youth academies that are more on the recreational level, I would say. And where typically, you would find more kids, like mostly kids are not necessarily advanced, because what usually happens is that the bigger clubs will pick up and scout kids that are, I guess, standing out in their level. And therefore you have a meritocracy system where, like, typically the better the kid becomes, the more likely he is to be picked up by a bigger and bigger club, right? So yeah, a child that is not advanced here can play. It's just not going to be necessarily like a bigger club, because typically what clubs do is they only field about 2 to 3 teams at most per age group. So you don't have clubs here in Italy where they have 40 teams per age groups like it happens in the US, right? With multiple locations. Every club only has one location, because it's really only attached to where the first team is based and the town that they really represent. Therefore, they only have about 2 to 3 at most age groups per year, which means at some time maybe it's just the type of club that is not for the level that child currently has. So there'll be a club next door that offers the level that is right for him.
Okay, so I have that. Now, in terms of the pyramid, then the youth teams are placed in the pyramid based on sort of how good they are, or how does that work? The levels, so basically.
It really separates between the age of like U14 and above, and U13 and below. So U13 and below here in Italy is called area attività di base, which is really like base activity. If you translate it, that means it is really like meant to be development and formation. So it's not focused on really winning games and whatnot. So those age groups, U13 and below, they all play in the same leagues. Okay, which means that your stronger clubs will play in leagues where there's also much weaker clubs. The only caveat to that is that if it's a professional team, the first team, so you're a professional academy, you have to play 1 year up. Okay, so if you're the U9 of a professional club, let's say AC Milan, okay, you're gonna play against U10 of clubs that are not professional. Okay, now past age 13, then that's where things really differentiate themselves. You got the leagues that are only for professional teams. So the U13 and above of professional teams. And then you have elite, regional, and province, which means the elite is kind of like, they're not professional academies, but they are kids that are pushing to get into professional academies. And then you got regionals, which is still pretty strong sides, and then the provincial side. So the travel is also like, could be a little like more extended if you're in the elite, just because there is less teams in the elite. It's a pyramid. And that really, at that point, I guess you could say that a U14 and above winning start matters, because the only way you can secure a place into like the next year, so to move from province to regional and to elite, is really by winning or being able to like have results that support a move to the next level. It's usually really by winning. It's a system of promotion and relegations year over year.
Now, is it a strict system of promotion relegation? And when I say that, I'll use the UK, for example. In their youth system, they have something like a promotion relegation. But even in the US, we have it within our classic system, at least in North Carolina. But it's kind of like a bit of negotiated as well, meaning if you win, the coach can submit you and be approved for you to move up. But if you win, but the coach thinks, oh, I'm going to lose like half my team and we're not going to, they'll say, no, we don't want to move up. Or is it as automatic as the adult leagues?
It's pretty much automatic. The only thing is you cannot get into the professional youth sides leagues because that is really only determined by whether the first team is a professional side. So if the first team is moving from Serie D to Serie C, which is the third tier, and that's the first step of really full professional, then the academy will have access all of a sudden to all the leagues of U13 and above where they're only playing professional teams. But for the other ones, the amateur ones, it's really a system of promotion and relegation. Yeah, you can probably opt out if you feel like you don't want to be in the elite, but I wouldn't see why, right? If you earn it on the field, typically like the economical effort that you would have to endure in order to be into the next year is not significantly different. Like you may have a little bit of longer travel, but it won't be anything excessive. It'll still be within, like, I would say the extended region. So it won't be outside of really, right, like the north and I wouldn't even say the north, south, center and south, but like the northeast, the north center, so it doesn't become like excessive travel. So no teams really opts out of playing the next year into like essentially like a league that they really like gain by playing, by winning. So
all right, so let's close the loop on this, okay? So I'm going to use an American example, and you're going to tell me if this exists in Italy. We're going to start very comprehensively. In the States, we have what you would call, I guess anybody would call them these, basically soccer franchises. So Little Kickers, Soccer Shots. These are franchises that are typically designed to help introduce kids to soccer, and they're clearly fun for-profit activity programs, and is perceived as just a soccer activity. They normally start at those tiny ages. I mean, as young as 3 or 4. And the kids grow out of them by the time they get to 10 or 11, typically.
Yeah.
Do they have those in Italy?
They do have them now. It's something very new that I found this time around. I actually have a 2-year-old daughter, and she's being introduced to the sport by participating in exactly what you described, except that here it's really for the ages 2 to 4 and 4 to 6. Within age 6, which is really here corresponds to first grade, then you would enter your typical academy club team, as I described before. So these types of like introduction to soccer, they're only like 2 to 6 years old. We don't really have anything beyond that age group that would be really just for profit type of franchise system.
And you consider that to be a relatively new phenomenon?
Very new. Most people are not aware of the existence. It's definitely something that has probably been imported as an idea, I would imagine, from the US, along other things that are happening now, which at the times that I grew up here in the 1980s, 1990s weren't available, which is another one is personalized training. It is definitely like something now here that is becoming more popular. And it's a way for youth coaches to make extra money on the side, but it's also helpful because it gives you, right, like the personalized training that a player needs and cannot get in necessarily in a team environment. So things are happening. Some of them must have been imported from the way the US does things.
Yeah, I would think so. Okay, so we got that. Now, let's say I come. We talked about 2 to 6. These franchises, which are relatively new. I probably imagine they're probably in mainly the bigger cities. They may not even make it out to the smaller towns.
Yeah, sure.
But the second thing is, let's say I have 2 children on the polar opposite. Both of them enjoy soccer. One of them is, and they both have the same skill level. Okay, they're both they're very much beginners. But one is hardcore. They love it. They just want to do it all the time. And one is very casual about it. Now, in the States, we are the king of product differentiation. We would be able to say, okay, this one's going to go to pre-ECNL and the other one's going to go to challenge. But how do you as a parent in Italy think about it? How do they typically think about it when it's that kind of situation?
I guess here it's more along the lines of really like what the level of the kid is determines how much involvement may have in terms of like training activity. Typically at the age group of like 10 years old, the amateur clubs, which is again 98% of like teams here, because the professional status only for really like the small percentage that are in the top 3 divisions. They only train 2 times, and there isn't really much options to train more than 2 times with the team. What you can do is personalized training on the side, versus like if the kid is good enough to be in a professional team, then a professional academy side at 10 years old, you probably train 3 times. You'll have more tournaments typically as well. And so like that's really like the differentiation between the two. The better the team, the more training there is, but it's all connected. It's not really 2 different systems out there, right? Like it just kind of like naturally happens. Like is the child progressing in a way that is going to be in a team that requires more of his time? That really determines whether how much he trains, or how. And if he wants to be sort of casual about it, I guess there is the option to remain casual. It's just like, I guess, past age 11, 12, when you get into that, that what they call here competitive, because here they don't call. It's funny, in the US we always differentiate competitive or recreational, even at U8. Well, here no, here they consider competitive anything that happens after U13, so U14 and above, and anything below is really considered non-competitive, even if you are in a very good team. Okay, but if you're advancing to those age groups that are considered competitive, and you're just not cut out to be in that type of environment, well, there is even an alternative system which is not under the Italian Federation, and it's more of an informal system. It's called CSI instead of like the federation is FIGC, Federazione Italiana Gioco Calcio. They basically run most of the teams, but there is also a system called CSI. It's more recreational. It's typically attached to like clubs that belong to churches, which we have kind of like it's called oratorio. It's like a place where you go play at the church setting. Well, usually they have a field available, and that also means that they can field the team in those leagues. And the team will train maybe once or twice a week and play a game every weekend, but it's just a lot more casual than let's say the overall system, right?
All right. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask a couple more specific questions, and then I'm actually going to pull up your Facebook post, and then I think it'll be easier just to tick off those topics, and then we'll be done. So in terms of, there are a few more things. In terms of cost, what are we talking about? Let's talk. I'm going to peel these off, and you describe cost, length of the season. You talked about practice time. We might rehash that. But those are the big ones. And then is the coach actually paid? And when I say paid, I don't mean the like what we would call gas money. I mean literally. Like I think here, I don't want to throw a number out here because it could be completely wrong. But for the purposes, and you might have a view on it, but let's just think 1,500. No, I don't even want to throw a number. But coaches here are paid enough to where it's worth their while to coach.
Yes.
Where it's not considered just a something to do for just the passion. But even though they are passionate about it and they're not paid a lot, but it's the difference between that kind of pay and pay just enough to cover your expenses.
Yeah, so here it's different. I'll say the only full-time coaches that you have in the youth setting are the ones that belong to professional academies, and that most likely also probably really applies to all the Serie A and Serie B teams for sure. So even if we're talking down to like the youngest age group, which is U8, so a U8 coach of AC Milan, he's doing that full time. A U8 coach of Atalanta, same thing. Then into like as you get down to the lower divisions, like past the first three, which are professional, then you have more of part-time type of like youth coaches. And as you get lower and lower into the leagues and smaller club teams, then of course those coaches are going to be doing something else beside coaching soccer, and it really comes down to like whether they're putting themselves out there, hoping that a bigger opportunity comes along. So they're making an investment in themselves. They're not doing it for any sort of like immediate economical return. Typically, what you have is a lot of physical education graduates that have played the game growing up. They got the basic license that it's usually appealing for parents to know that they have, but it's not required for the very youngest age group, but it becomes kind of like a requirement, I believe, for like past U11 or so. And they work the training sessions in the late afternoon, and usually during the day they may be physical trainers at a gym as well. So they're doing a couple of jobs to really like survive. That's how it is, and they're just hoping that like because of their job is like visible to other ones, they'll be picked up by bigger clubs, and eventually they'll get into the professional academy rankings, and they'll make it as a full-time role.
Yeah, and let me interject there. As we start thinking about the U.S. and how we're going to bend the cost curve, I often say we don't have a clear path. We don't have a club neutral pathway to a professional player. We don't have a club neutral pathway for a player to become a professional. And we don't, at least it doesn't appear to me to be a really clear pathway for amateur coach to make it to an academy. So therefore you don't, this is my opinion, and you can jump in on this because you know the States well. It's not a culture where, say, a 22-year-old would just coach the equivalent of rec, pour their heart and soul in it, in the hope that an academy will see them and they can work their way up the ranks like it is, say, in the UK. And I think that's one challenge we have, where it sounds like you're saying in Italy, someone with a professional drive, say, will cut their chops in the grassroots level, do a great job, and slowly move up the pecking order.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I lost you there a little, but I think I know what you meant. Yeah, so it's very different because essentially the number of professional teams in the US is.
So I'll pause it again because it was delayed. So I was effectively saying, I don't feel like there's a clear pathway for young coaches who start at the recreational level to move all the way up to professional ranks compared to in Europe, where at least that's how I perceive it to be. You're going to jump in and give me your context.
Yeah, so I think that the major difference is that in the US, you only have few professional teams, right? You have 29 going to 30 MLS teams. You don't even have professional teams in every state. Below the MLS, you have USL Championship. It's probably in the 25 right range, but not all of them field academies, which is very surprising. So the second division teams in the US don't necessarily have an academy. And that applies especially to the third division, which is the USL League One, right? The third tier. So that's one major difference with Europe, with England, with Italy. The density of professional teams is very different. Like so in the Milan area currently, you have currently five. So it's right, like just in the immediate area. Because we have AC Milan, Inter Milan, in Milan, and then right outside we have Monza, which is actually where I'm staying right now, where I'm living, which is in Serie A. And then you have Como, which is 45 minutes away, which is now in Serie A after many years. And then you have Atalanta in Bergamo, which is 40 minutes away. And then beyond the Serie A teams in the immediate area of Milan, then you got a few that are in like Serie B teams, and then Serie C. Like, so you got like probably 15 professional teams in the Milan metropolitan area. Well, if you compare it with like, any large city in the US, there's just no comparison. So that's why the coaches cannot really come up the system and the players either, because there isn't really that many ways to be noticed and seen, right? So that I believe that's really the biggest difference. And England, of course, has like huge number of like professional teams. I believe it's like 90 or so. So you can just imagine.
So, but then how much does it cost? Because, and the reason I'm going with the cost piece as well is because one common thing is I believe we tend to compare apples to oranges at times. So I really want to hear from you, because you have perspective. You're going to understand a little bit about what these guys are getting paid, the fields and stuff. When we talk about the cost, let's talk about the cost to the parent, and then let's try to unpack why that's the case, or why that may or may not be the case. So you sign your 10-year-old, you sign your 10-year-old up for amateur soccer. How much are you paying, and what are you getting?
So I can tell you what I'm currently in the team my son is in. It's the whole overall cost for the entire season, which here runs from September to June. It's 700 euros for the year. Okay. It's definitely on the expensive end, I would say, because this is essentially the richest part of Italy. So I wouldn't be surprised if in regions on the opposite side of the country, like in Calabria, Puglia, Sicily, those regions, the cost is probably 50% of what I just mentioned, probably like 300 to 400 euros a year. Why is the cost so different than in the US? Well, mainly because there isn't much traveling involved for kids at all. Like I said, there isn't such thing as traveling out of state or whatnot. There could be one tournament a year that they do outside of the region. And other than that, right, like the coaches are not full timers, like compared to like what you have in the US, right? Like in the US, you have very much amateur clubs where they got plenty of like full-time coaches that are treated and paid like professional coaches in Europe, right? So that's a major difference as well. And then you got a bunch of levels of managers or directors of the clubs over there in the US that like you just don't have here. So there aren't many fixed costs outside of really like the maintenance of the facility of the team, which is partly subsidized usually by the town itself, right? So that also helps. So the cost is very different. Of course, salaries are different too. So you could say they're, relatively speaking, while salaries on average are about 1/3 in Italy of what they are in the US. So you're getting close to like the 700 euros times 3. Well, you're getting closer to like the type of money that parents pay in the US. Unfortunately, in the US, it's usually not just $2,000 to $2,500 dollars a year, but then as you become better, you're paying more because you're traveling more, you're participating in these leagues like MLS Next and CNL that require a lot of traveling. So you're getting to 5,000-10,000. Well, that's very different here because the better you get in Europe, the less you pay. And if you approach the kind of the professional academies, that's when it becomes free, right? Like in the professional academies, the kids are not paying anything to play.
So trying to put thank you for that. And that's very, very helpful. Trying to put your American parent hat on. And this is a thing that's really hard to picture. The expectations of a coach, whatever that means to you, try your best because it's complicated because all the parents are different, the regions are different. It's just so complicated. Even, I mean, my wife is totally different. What she values versus what I value in soccer are totally different. So we're just going to have a wildly gross conversation about this. But I feel, and part of this, and this is just me thinking out loud, part of it is because American sports tend to be very coach centric traditionally, and then our culture is our culture. That I feel they have a higher expectation, whether it's right or wrong or whatever, and whether their analysis is correct or not. They have a higher expectation of the role of the coach. But I don't. I'm just talking out loud. But they just have a higher expectation of what they perceive to be the role of the coach. And so I'm trying to square that with, if they came to Italy, would they be satisfied with what they see on the day to day from a club that doesn't cost as much?
I would say so, although there is a very different approach in the younger age groups. Again, I'm going back to like U13 and younger. The emphasis is so much more on development and formation of players rather than, going out and collecting trophies at different tournaments. To the extent that years ago, and this is after I grew up here, because when I grew up here in the 80s and 90s, we played, even as 9-year-old, we played with league tables. Well, in the early 2000s, which is 20 years ago, the federation made a choice to essentially eliminate league tables at all levels until U13. That means that no matter how good your kid is, as a parent, you're going to have to accept that he's going to play in games which have really not a meaning in terms of like winning or climbing a table or whatnot. And further than that, even the result will not be published. So, the game is divided in 4 quarters, and every quarter it can be one of the two sides. Well, the only thing that gets really informed, the only one that really gets informed about the result is the federation, because they use those results usually in the spring to make better groups that are a little bit less random than what they do in the fall. So every year in the fall, you have pretty much random drawing of those groups the way they're made. So you have very strong teams and very weak ones in the same. And then based on the results, they're only published to the federation, so they're not really publicly available. Then they'll make a spring group that is a little bit tougher for certain teams versus others. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that an American parent would be shocked by the fact that, like, here, there isn't really an emphasis on winning and really, like, the idea is that the player is being developed, and that means that playing time is pretty much the same for every kid up to that age group. So it'd be very rare at U13 and below to see a coach that like tries to play some kids more than others. What's going to happen is that essentially, if, like, it's going back to what we discussed before, every kid tend to be at a team that makes sense for him, which means that the groups tends to be homogeneous, which means also that everybody gets to play really the same amount of time, right? Because again, winning essentially matters to the kids because the kids want to win. That's normal, but it matters a lot less to everybody else.
Yeah, and I can see that definitely with American culture. But I want to be, and then I want to go, and then after this question, I want to go to the Facebook post. I'm going to share my screen. But I'm trying to think about it. So, because I'm not a typical American parent, sometimes it's actually hard for me to identify with some of the logic. But I'm trying to say, like, trying to think out loud. So, does every child in the training session have a ball? Do they feel like the coach is always on time? One of my older son's club, they don't do this, but one club they do. Does the coach send an email and say, "Hey guys, we just had this game, and this is kind of what we're working on, and we're going to be doing this, and we care about possession soccer, and and they say all these things, and and blah blah blah, and guys, we have these standards, and then I got my older son's club. If you don't have the right uniform, you're not going to be able to participate because this is kind of how we're trying to do it. And I got another son's club that says, we want everybody to make mistakes, and we don't care if we lose. So what I'm trying to say, there's a customer service element that I don't know, does that exist? So it's not just about winning and losing. It's about this whole Americana culture that comes with youth soccer that I don't know if that exists in that way. And that's what I mean by will they be satisfied? So we lose 13-0. Does the coach say, hey guys, we got beat out there, but we were working on this, and this, and that's what we're trying to do? Or do they just walk away and don't say anything to the parents? They don't care. Do they respond to emails? What Americans like.
It's very different. It's a lot more informal, I would say, for the way that I experienced it. Like, communication is through WhatsApp for the most part. There's a WhatsApp group among the parents, but really the coach is not included in that WhatsApp group. So the coach really doesn't communicate much on the day-to-day with the parents at all. There's checkpoints during the season where they'll have a meeting and the coach may talk generally to all the parents, but just a lot less involvement from the parents on all sides of things. It's kind of like, okay, if you're not happy with the way things are, usually halfway through the year or at the end of the season, so either in January or in June, you can ask for like your child to change team. And usually there's no issue, right? Like, especially in the non-professional team setting. Beyond that, I guess the better the team are, even the less involvement the parents will have, right? So like it'd be absolutely insane to think that like parents have any sort of like decision making in a professional academy setting. So it's very, very different, I would say. Like just everything I would say about the way the parents live through this, you could describe it as much more grounded about their child level, and just in general less involved in really like determining like how things should be done.
All right. So the last one before we share the Facebook post, and then I'm gonna get you out of here. Let's say I'm walking by and I see AC Milan training. And I'm like, man, my child is not good enough to play there, but I know in 2 or 3 years I want him to be recruited. So I want that. I want I want now what those children are getting in terms of the type of coach, the type of leagues, the type of training, the number of contact hours. I want whatever I perceive the child at AC Milan is getting. In the States, there are people, actually, my son is a club, part of one, who offer that. They'll say, yep, we're going to do exactly that. We won't have the same caliber of kids, but we're going to give you the same training hours. You're going to get a director who's been all over the world and got all these licenses, and he's going to run it just like what he saw in Barcelona. We're going to get the same training hours. You're going to do the physio. You're going to play in all these tournaments. So in the States, they can't give you exactly, I'm going to use Charlotte FC because obviously that's a professional academy, but they can mimic to the best of their ability what Charlotte FC is going to do, and you're going to pay.
Yeah.
And parents make a decision if that's what they want. The challenge is everybody says that, right? And everybody pay, but let's control for the quality. Let's assume that they are doing exactly what they say they're going to do. What would you tell me? I'll come to you. I'm like, Simone, I want AC Milan and my kid is average. What are you going to tell me? What do I have? What can I do? What team can I join? What are you going to tell me I can do?
Sorry, I lost you a sec. But you, like I said, because here there is different levels from the top to the bottom. I say that, assuming that the child has the level required, he will jump into like a higher level season over season with a bigger club. And as you get closer to the top ones, he'll resemble more those clubs. But no club can offer the type of conditions, let's say, that AC Milan offers, except, of course, their direct competitor, Inter Milan, maybe Atalanta, right? But so not even really Monza and Como probably can really offer the same. So it just kind of depends where the level is.
But
There
no, let's
are,
say I got an average kid, because I'm going to harp
like,
on this. And
even
I see,
amateur.
let me say, I got an average kid, and I see AC Milan trains with a pro coach 3 days a week, and I want that. Can I get that?
No, not unless the child has sort of like a level that will determine his ability to play in a club that tries to give the same, which won't be the same in terms of facilities, but it'll be somewhat similar order of type of like number of trainings, coaches that are more experienced, and participation in tournaments where there is going to be teams like AC Milan participating. It just comes down to the level, really. So you can't really put your child in there. He has to be scouted and recruited, right? As you go up, it's not open to anybody. It's just like it has to be recruited in there.
Are there people, say former players? This happens in Brazil some, definitely in Latin America, who say, we're going to create a team, we're going to create a club with the explicit intent. This happens in the UK as well, to get you scouted. So we're going to be at a scrimmage, AC Milan.
Yeah. Again, there are the very best amateur teams. Usually, the first team may be semi-professional, like in the Serie D, which is the fourth tier. Yeah, they often are run by former players that have the connection, so they're able to bring in kids in there that have the level to then possibly sell them over to the bigger clubs, right? Because they have the know-how, they have the connections and whatnot. So that's typically what you would see here.
Okay. All right. So I know it's late there, so we're gonna go to speed round. We're going to speed round. You ready?
Yep.
Speed round. So I'm just sharing your Facebook post. We're gonna hit a couple of these things, and I'm gonna let you get out of here. The 7v7 game has no offsides. The play of the 7v7. So you wrote it. So let's just talk about this first piece. People can see it as well, and we'll come back on if we want to get more insight later, because I know it's getting late where you're at.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so in the US, there is a race in getting into the bigger formation. So moving from 5v5 to 7v7 as soon as possible, even 9v9. I say here and in Europe in general, it's just slower. So just to give you a reference, like the team my son last played for in Texas already is playing 9v9 because they're playing also 1 year up. The team he's playing with here in Italy, it's the first year they play 7v7. And it will be 7v7 next year as well for this age group. So everything I think happens later because they recognize that the more you have the ball at your feet, the better you develop as a player. Okay, so there's less of an urgency to get into like a real soccer setting. And offside, I guess it's they don't want distractions. I guess 7v7 here has never been seen just from the longest time. Even when adults play, adults here don't play 7v7 with offside. It's very particular 7v7 in the US has offside.
So here, I'm going to say for the next one, if my younger sons, he plays quote unquote pre-ECNL, it's not that they have league tables, because they don't. But the parents definitely care about whether or not they see the teams winning. And one of the issues we have, at least I perceive, I don't think the average parent perceives this as an issue. I perceive it as an issue. Is one of the things you said is they create their league and they exclude local teams from their league, which prevents us from seeing how the local teams are playing and increases travel. I'm saying that to say, now going to the second point, you can add any color you want on the second point.
Yeah, sure. I mean, here again, there are no league tables at all until U13. So the first year where they get league tables is really U14. And I guess the particular part is the federation decides the groups. So there is absolutely no alternative leagues being created, parallel leagues being created. Everybody plays in the same field.
All right, moving along. Y'all might hear my beep on my Facebook, but okay. So there are no informal or independent teams. You can clarify that. But then their teams are only part of a full club with the first team. Okay, so here in the States, you're saying like my older son's club is an independent club that does not feed into a professional first team. You're saying that doesn't necessarily exist?
Yeah, and by first team I don't mean just professional. Like I said, it could be that the first team is down in the seventh or eighth tier of Italian football, but that's still a first team, and so you're still aiming to produce players that eventually can be promoted to that first team, and that first team is aiming to like achieve promotion and go up every year, right? So it's a very different idea. There's no just youth soccer club. Just the idea of concept name youth soccer club, it doesn't exist here. Here it's a club, and the club has the first team down to the youth level.
I understand. Now we're doing a speed round because I know it's getting late where you are. We might have to get you back on for another whole nother conversation about this. But here, so when you say there are no divisions or tiers of leagues until U14, one of the things that American parents, and I'm saying American parents not because they're unique, but this is just what I know because I'm American. They're very conscious about lopsided games and not being of value. So they want parity. They want the team to win, but they want it to be a close game. So when you say there are no, and that's a generalization, by the way. When you say there are no divisions or tiers, you know how here we have you're in my son pre-ECNL, classic, white, all these things. What do you mean by this?
Yeah, essentially, again, the U14 and below, the federation is drawing the groups by proximity, which means that in your group you're going to have some strong teams and some weak teams. Now, the one thing I mentioned before is that for the professional youth sides, they have to play 1 year up. So, in a way, because they're playing 1 year up, they're still winning usually, and winning big time, even 1 year up. But it's just a little bit more challenging. What happens besides the league is that then they get invited to the better tournaments, and so the better tournaments is probably where they get most of the competition that they want to really get. That's for like the bigger teams. I'm saying the tournaments is really like where the filter is very high for participating into tournaments. The league play, well, that's until U14 is the same for everyone.
So when you say only pro clubs, pro academies train 3 times a week, and
that's
I'm
the
going to
age
hammer
group
on this
U10,
again.
U11.
I mean, 3 times a wait. What now?
That's for the age groups that we're discussing, like U10,
Yeah,
U11, and below, ones. Right? Like for the older ones, even the amateur clubs will, depending how good they are, they'll train 3 times, even 4 times. Just depends. 3 times more likely.
So let's assume that I'm just set on my child training at least 3 times a week at 10. Do some parents opt to try to put their kid in more than one, like 2 amateur clubs to bolt on extra training?
You can't, because you can only be registered with 1 team at a time. So given that all the teams fall under the federation and the registration is through the federation, you can't have a child in 2 teams. What you do is you get extra personalized training, usually outside of the 2 training sessions, if you want to do extra work. And you hope you get into a team that is good, that is the ones that are training 3 times, which are the professional ones.
All right. So I want you to put your ultra American hat on. What if a parent says, okay, I get that. I just want to get some extra training. So I'm going to, like in my area, we have a big Hispanic culture. So when my son was younger, he was on one of the Hispanic teams as well, his club team. But the Hispanic team was just registered as a recreational team. What if we said, I get that. I just want him to go to the trainings, but he's not going to be able to play any games. Is that something that everybody will look at you culturally as crazy? Or would people say, well, if you want to come to the training, come on?
No, you cannot train even with another club usually. So you can only do that at the end of the season. You need to have a release basically from your previous season club in order to do that. So,
all right. So I'm just being very methodical. So, yep, you can't. So you cannot trial for a pro club until you're 10?
Correct, and that's only an invitation. So the professional clubs do field U8 as the youngest age groups, but they're usually fielding that U8 based on scouting they've done the year before on the U7 of amateur clubs. So they're basically going out and like contacting the parents themselves and say, "Hey, I like your child. I want to bring him in here." But there is no initiation from the parents of like, "Hey, I like to bring my child there" or whatnot. It's just like a scouting system.
And when they scout them at that very young age, do you think they kind of like are going to accept them, not to disappoint them?
In what sense?
So before they make contact with the parent, they pretty much decided we're at least going to bring them in.
They really can't bring him in before age 10 because the federation forbids it. So they cannot really have him in training with the team before that age. But usually everybody here will jump at the opportunity to move to a professional academy. So when you're asked at the end of the season, you just go if you have the opportunity. Now, if you have more than one, well, I guess you'll just go to the bigger name or whatnot.
All right. So we talked about the cost. Now, how would you compare the girls' soccer programming? I do a horrible job because I have two sons. I haven't talked about that enough. So, culturally, opportunities. I have a daughter. How would you compare that to what you see in the States?
It's smaller. It has changed significantly for the better in the sense that back in the days when in the 1980s there was no girls soccer whatsoever, but now you do have change in Europe as you've seen, and the progress has been great. I wouldn't say that Italy is one of the best countries for women's soccer, but we have a professional league now, so down to the youth level, it's reflecting. It's still a sport that it's mainly targeting male. I'll give you a reference like that intro to soccer program that my daughter is doing. She's like 3 years old, not even. Uh, there is probably 90% of the kids of that age attending are boys, and only 10% are girls. So that's very different in the US. In the US, it'd be 50-50, right? So
now we have the quote unquote build out line, but how the keeper plays is definitely going to be a function of how the club coach and club want them to play, and then obviously what the keeper sees. But what do you mean by he has 6 seconds to pass it? Y'all don't do the build out line?
No. So basically, anytime the defender at these age groups, again, the 9, 10 years old, 11, plays it back to the goalkeeper, it's like a safety zone. As long as the goalkeeper receives it, he has it in the box, and he doesn't hold it too long, nobody can go pressure him. So there is no build-up line, but the goalkeeper cannot be pressured inside the box.
Okay. So let's be clear. Because when we do the quote unquote build out line, that's only from a specific, like the ball goes out and stuff. But you're saying live action, I pass it back to the keeper. He has 6 seconds.
Yeah. And I haven't really seen it enforced. It's more like the kids the forward will run, but they will stop because the ball is in the goalkeeper's feet, and like until the ball is in the box. Now if the goalkeeper comes out of the box with the feet, then it can be pressured.
I understand. Now here's a biggie, and I'm going to ask you to find me some film on this one. You know referees, and the kids call a foul at these younger ages.
Correct. Yeah, there's no referees in all these age groups. That's another decision that was made, I guess, years ago. When I grew up in the 80s, there was a referee. He wasn't a formal referee, but typically be a director of the club, somebody that is like an adult associated with the club. Nothing too formal, no linesman whatsoever, even back then. But now there is absolutely nobody even with a whistle on the field. It is self-refed, the game, all the way to U13. The kids are basically learning if they can get away with some fouls. At the same time, the other kid has a right to call for a foul, and if it's obvious to everyone, then the play will stop. But if it's not, unfortunately, it just won't be called. All the obvious fouls get called.
So now the speed round on parent culture, though, and we talked about in the pre-show, we talked about Texas and Texas being at the risk of being overly general, even being a different culture within the states, right? So how would you compare the parent culture in Texas from what you've experienced to what you experienced in Italy?
Yeah, I mean, extremely different because the sideline is a lot more quiet. So the parents may give a bit of indications to their children, up, down, come back. You'll hear those things, but right there is the level of noise is quite different compared to like what I experienced in Texas. And then because there isn't a referee, well, then there is nobody to be abused, really, right? So, and to be honest, I've seen that whenever the parents try to call a foul, I've seen kids turning to the parents saying, "It's not your place to call it. Like it's really us. It's our game. The kids, it's self-ref, and we're calling the foul. Not even the coaches are really usually intervening."
I'm gonna use that as one of my true false. So be ready to add some context. You might have to take a PTO day just to deal with the people because they're gonna be shocked. All right, going to speed round. I know it's getting late. You said kids are all required, and I hate to put your post on blast, but it was so good. Kids are all required to change and shower after training and games, and they cannot arrive at the games dressed in game gear. Rather, have to change in the locker room. No exceptions. Locker room is considered a little school. Break that down.
Yeah, so I mean, the culture here in the Southern European countries is very different in the sense that, like, the club teams, they only exist within a contest where you have infrastructure. Infrastructure means they're only having a playing field, a training field, but also like a system of locker rooms, like usually like 4 to 6 plus the referee ones, which means that kids they come, they change, they get in the field, and they finish and they shower before they go home. It's been embedded into the system from the longest time. When I tell parents here that in the US kids do none of that, they're shocked. It's just a very different, I guess, culture in that sense, you could say. I have heard that like in the Northern European countries and UK, there is less of emphasis on this. Matter of fact, my one of my good friends who is an academy coach at Inter said when they go to international tournaments in Europe, a lot of times the teams stay at the same hotel. And like he complained that like when some of the teams from the north, which apparently it's more common not to shower, the kids don't shower after a game. They come down to like the cafeteria of the hotel right after a game without showering. It's like it smells so bad. It says big, and like versus like the Spanish, French, Italian teams that they're all showering. It's just part of the culture, very different. So
Yeah, that's just a different cultural thing. I wish that would, hey, that's a cultural thing I wish rubbed off on my older son. All right. So another honorable mention, you said futsal wasn't that big, but it's gaining some speed.
Yeah, there's been a lot of research done, I guess, by the professional sides, and they've obviously heard that it's big in Brazil, to an extent in Spain and Argentina. So I guess they are trying to figure out how to make things better, also because the Italian national team has missed out on 2 World Cups in a row, right? Even though they won the Euro Cup in between. But one thing I noticed that it's the soccer here is played 90% of the times on artificial turf, and because the turf it's a faster surface and the setting is smaller. Like I said, they're playing 7v7 here. Still age groups that they play 9v9 in the US. I guess you could say that some of the aspects of futsal are being reflected into like just the day-to-day soccer here, because we're so much, at least in Texas, we seldomly play there. The kids seldomly play on turf. It's mostly natural grass, big parks. Here it's always turf. So the surface and the speed of the play and the space is more compact. So there's aspects, I guess, of futsal that in the US kids are trying to get outside of their soccer setting into futsal.
All right. So the last question, and we're wrapping it up here, is an open-ended question. I'm gonna give you the last word. You have become the federation. You have become the federation president of a new country that's recently formed that has half Italians, half Texans. And you are now the football federation. They have no soccer in existence until you come. What are some of the best practices you would take from what you saw in Texas at all and Italy? What are some of the best things you like? And what are some of the things you don't like from Texas and or Italy that you would use in your 1 to 2 minute elevator speech? As let's do it this way. You are running to become the federation president of this new country that's made up of Italian and Texan citizens, and you got to give your elevator speech, and you're going to talk about some of the things you like, some of the things you don't like from both areas. You're going to put it together and come up with the perfect soccer system. And you got about 2 minutes. What are you going to tell me?
Yeah, sure. Look, the Italian system, which is really, again, reflective of European, I like the fact that it's so level field, in the sense that you only have teams playing under one federation, no different alternative leagues. So that would be number one for me. There's no parallel leagues being formed. The second part would be every team as a first team. So you're producing players for the first team with the aim to get them into the first team, and for the first team to push up through the division. So I like promotion and relegation. And then I guess what I do like of Texas is the fact that you have this huge like amount of really immigrants, for the most part, that bring different right aspects of the game through to their countries, which in Italy, yeah, Italian society is changing, and you have more kids now that are of immigrants, but it's not nearly as common as in the US. So I think that's a huge advantage that the US has, the fact that the system is right, like so many people of different background are living through the system, and so there's a reflection of aspects of the game in those countries that their parents are bringing with them, which I think is positive. We've seen it in France, England, like countries that have immigration much more like longer tenure than Italy. So I like all that aspect. The other thing, I feel like this idea that like the registration at younger levels here in Italy means that you can only be with one team the entire year. It doesn't give the flexibility to maybe go and play as a guest or whatnot. I think as long as you're not overdoing it, I think it can be a positive in the way that it's done, because it allows you to like learn to basically adjust to different teammates and whatnot on the fly. And I think that makes the player, it just makes the player more ready to like eventually to go to trials and like just function into like different team environments. So I like that aspect. Here in Europe, it's a lot more strict. Like you're with that team for that year. Unless you ask a formal transfer, you're not really going to be able to like kind of venture out. So I would keep that flexibility in the younger age groups like you have in Texas for sure.
All right, you win the election. We're ready for you. So listen, there was so much that we didn't get to cover. Also, I want to do this debate on if you've had to have played. See, another thing too about having to play, like I lived in England for a long time. I didn't meet a person that was in the soccer. I'm sorry, that was in the sports I'd never met a male who was in the sports who didn't play soccer. So it's kind of like a mute point, like to never have played. So we really get into a thought exercise of, what are those quintessential skills that you need, and how are those quintessential skills acquired? So we want to have a debate on that in another show. But this has been wonderful, man. And you've dropped a lot of information. I tell everybody all the time, this is just a conversation to introduce you to the group. And then when people have questions, it's best just them to drop them in chat and they go into further detail. We try to capture a lot, but you'd be exhausted if we captured everything. My name is Neil Crawford. I am the host of the Inside Scoop, also the founder of Anytime Soccer Training. Guys, let's get better together. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, everyone.